In the hours when night sinks deepest, when the world becomes nothing more than a trembling breath between darkness and something older than darkness, there are tales that stir like bones beneath soil. And among those whispered horrors, there walks, or rather rides, a figure that should not be. A rider without a face, a hunter without a voice, a shadow without mercy. Listen closely. Even now, if you dare to still your breath, you may hear the faint, deliberate rhythm of hooves striking the earth, slow at first, then gathering speed, as though something long dead has realized you're listening. Tonight, we wander into a legend older than America, older than Sleepy Hollow, older even than the name that chills every spine from the misty hills of Europe to the trembling forests of the New World, the Headless Horseman. Before we begin our descent into this ancient abyss of folklore, tell me, which region of this haunted world do you watch from? The mountains, the plains, the cities where shadows run deeper than alleys? Let me know in the comments below. Your land may hide its own rider without a head. And if the darkness intrigues you, if stories like this sharpen your curiosity like a blade pressed to bone, subscribe so the next horror finds you before sleep does. Now, let us go back, far back, to the beginning. The story of the Headless Horseman did not begin in America. Its birth lies not in Sleepy Hollow's marshes, nor in the frightened memories of 18th century villagers. No, its origins are older, carried by the wind through centuries and across oceans, born from a fear as ancient as war itself, the fear of death without a face. In the dim caverns of Celtic myth, there was once a nightmare that rode across moonless fields, the Dullahan. Neither man nor ghost, it carried its own severed head under one arm, the eyes rolling wildly like trapped lightning, the mouth twisted into a grin that had seen the end of countless souls. Legends whispered that the Dullahan did not merely pass by, it hunted. And when it stopped riding, somebody died. Even before the Dullahan, Europe cradled older fears, stories of ancient warriors who, in death, rose without heads, continuing the endless cycle of war that life denied them. In Ireland, in Scotland, in Germany, everywhere blood had soaked the ground, people spoke of riders searching for the skulls they had lost in battles no one remembered. To be headless was not merely to be dead. It was to be exiled from identity, torn from one's own story, trapped between worlds. A soul without a face is a soul with no place to rest. This symbolism haunted Europe for centuries. Decapitation was not uncommon in the Old World. On medieval battlefields, severed heads lay like grotesque trophies scattered in the mud. Knights charged into war knowing that a blade might remove not only their lives, but the one thing their families would need for burial rituals: their face. In many European cultures, a soul could not enter the afterlife if its head was missing. The head was believed to hold memory, spirit, destiny. And so when a warrior lost his head, he lost his eternity. And when eternity is stolen, wrath remains. Thus grew the belief that these decapitated warriors rose again, mounted on the same steeds they rode to their deaths, wandering forever across the fog-cloaked fields where war raged hardest. They were not malevolent at first, merely lost, searching, grieving, but stories reshape with retelling, and fear reshapes with time. Soon the headless rider became a herald of death, a phantom who rode with purpose, with hunger, with vengeance, pursuing the living with an unrelenting, almost divine fury. Europe feared the headless riders long before Sleepy Hollow ever existed. By the 1600s and 1700s, something fascinating and terrifying began to appear in rural European writings. In dusty journals of priests, in the trembling reports of travelers, in the folklore recorded by scholars seeking to document the vanishing old world, the headless rider re-emerged like a forgotten nightmare, clawing its way back into the living memory. The details varied, but the horror remained constant. A rider on a dark horse, a missing head, a relentless pursuit. A figure glimpsed at crossroads, forest paths, lonely bridges, and churchyards. Always riding, always searching, never speaking. In some German villages, he was said to ride only at the year's end, heralding misfortune. In Ireland, the Dullahan flung buckets of blood on those marked for death. In Scotland, he galloped across battlefields, crying for vengeance. The headless rider was not one monster, it was many, many cultures, many wars, many fears bound together by one terrifying absence, the absence of a face. When European settlers crossed the ocean seeking new land, they did not leave their ghosts behind. They carried their folklore the same way they carried their hopes and griefs, in the silent chambers of memory. Among these settlers were the Dutch, whose stories were rich with spectral riders and wandering spirits. They built towns in the New World that felt eerily similar to the villages they had left behind. Small, isolated communities where fear could grow like vines in the dark. And with them came the headless rider. But legends do not remain unchanged when they travel. They evolve. They take new shapes in new lands. They adapt like living things, because fear, too, must survive. In America, the legend shed some of its European traits and absorbed the anxieties of the New World. War, uncertainty, death far from home. And it settled, quietly, ominously, into one small valley in the state of New York, a place already drenched in mist, superstition, and whispers. When Washington Irving eventually wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, he was not inventing a new monster. He was distilling centuries of nightmares into a single figure. The headless horseman who haunted a quiet valley and chased a trembling schoolteacher across a bridge under a hungry, indifferent moon. But why did the legend take root so deeply here? Because American soil was no stranger to war, death, and ghosts. The Revolutionary War had left its scars. Whole fields were soaked in blood. Many soldiers died unburied, unremembered, unseen. Among these were the Hessian mercenaries, German soldiers hired by the British, whose presence was feared and resented. Stories grew around their deaths, stories of violent ends, stories of bodies found without heads. And in the fertile imagination of folklore, these stories fused with the European myths settlers had carried across the sea. From that union rose a new incarnation, a Hessian soldier struck down by a cannonball, denied burial rites, doomed to ride forever. Irving merely gave shape to what locals already whispered. The legend was already alive, already riding, already feared. Why does the headless horseman endure when other myths fade into dust? Because he represents something timeless, something far more universal than a ghost chasing a man through the woods. Headlessness is the horror of losing identity. The horse's unstoppable fate thundering forward. The chase is the past pursuing the living. The missing head is unfinished business, unresolved trauma, the unburied sorrow of history. This myth is not just a story, it is a wound, and wounds remember. From Europe's battlefields to America's haunted valleys, the headless horseman rides because we still fear what he embodies, the things we cannot leave behind. Listen closely, for in the trembling hush between memory and myth, there lies a wound that has never healed. It bleeds still, slowly, darkly, across centuries, staining the soil where soldiers once screamed into the void. If you stand there long enough, if you press your ear to the earth, you may still hear it. The distant thud of hooves, the low growl of a rider who should never have risen again. They say every ghost is born from grief. But some, my friend, some are born from war. Let me take you back to the days when the world was torn open, when gunpowder fog masked the horizon, and men marched into battles that would bury their names but not their suffering. It was during one such conflict, in the fractured dawn of revolution, that a soldier met his fate so violently that death itself refused to hold him. He was a Hessian, one of those mercenaries the British hired, men of iron discipline and colder hearts. Villagers trembled at the sight of them. Their uniforms were stiff, their boots black as raven wing. Dark, imposing, feared even by his own kind, he rode a monstrous steed that seemed too massive to belong to the living. The locals whispered he had no soul left, that war had carved it out of him long ago. Some claimed he laughed at death, that he welcomed cannon fire like a cold embrace. Others swore he never removed his helmet, that no one alive had seen the face beneath it. But fate, cruel and theatrical, chose to unmask him in a way no living man could endure. It happened on a battlefield wreathed in smoke, where the trees stood like charred skeletons and the air quivered with the shrieks of dying soldiers. The Hessian charged forward as though the storm itself had swallowed him, wielding his blade with savage grace. Muskets roared, sabers clashed, and the ground trembled under the stampede of war. Then came the cannon. A monstrous iron scream tore through the battlefield, ripping the world apart with thunder and fire. The Hessian turned, too late. In a single catastrophic instant, the cannonball struck him with such brutal force that it tore his head clean from his shoulders. It did not fall gracefully. It did not rest peacefully. It tumbled into the mud, rolled between torn bodies, and disappeared into the chaos of battle, lost, forgotten, abandoned. A man without a face, a soldier without a burial, a spirit without an ending. And that, my friend, is where most stories would conclude. But curses do not lie quietly under the soil. When the war ended and peace settled like dust over the land, the townspeople hoped to forget the horrors they had witnessed. Yet, on certain fog-shrouded nights, when the moon was thin and cold, riders traveling home swore they saw a dark shape at the edge of the woods. A horse, massive, black, restless, and upon it, a rider with no head upon his shoulders. Some said he was searching. Some said he was hunting. Some said he was demanding what was stolen from him by war, his identity, his justice, his missing skull. He was not merely a ghost. He was an accusation, a reminder that violence does not end with death, that grief does not vanish when cannons fall silent, that war writes stories no history book dares to record. And so the legend grew, fed by fear, by memory, by the trembling imagination of a town desperate to explain why strange hoofprints appeared near the graveyard long after midnight, or why a cold wind howled across the fields as though searching for something long lost. Those who encountered the phantom described the same vision: the heavy thundering of a war horse, the silhouette of a rider whose shoulders ended not in a face, but in swirling darkness, and the chilling certainty that he saw you, even without eyes. Witnesses swore his movements were not wild, but purposeful. He was not wandering. He was looking. For what? For whom? That is where the curse sharpens its teeth. Some believed he sought the soldier who fired the fatal cannon, but that man died long ago. Others murmured that he searched for the gravediggers who buried him without his head. They too have long returned to dust, and still the horseman rides. Because curses, you see, do not obey the boundaries of time. The townsfolk whispered that the Hessian's wrath took a new form after death, that his ghost had grown more terrible, more deliberate as decades passed, that he no longer galloped the battlefield alone, but roamed the countryside, crossing roads, shadows, and unwary travelers. What he searches for remains the darkest question: his head, retribution, or perhaps something far more terrible. A new story to bury itself inside, a new soul to drag into the legend, a new name to carve into the long, cold ledger of war. For every tale that survives stays alive, and the Hessian's tale, the tale of the soldier's curse, is a creature that feeds on fear, on memory, on the breath of anyone who dares to whisper it aloud at night. So if you ever walk alone near the old woods, if the fog curls low and the air thickens like old breath, listen, for the ground will begin to tremble. The hoof And that, my friend, is where most stories would conclude. But curses do not lie quietly under the soil. When the war ended and peace settled like dust over the land, the townspeople hoped to forget the horrors they had witnessed. Yet, on certain fog-shrouded nights, when the moon was thin and cold, riders traveling home swore they saw a dark shape at the edge of the woods. A horse, massive, black, restless, and upon it, a rider with no head upon his shoulders. Some said he was searching, some said he was hunting, some said he was demanding what was stolen from him by war, his identity, his justice, his missing skull. The soldiers who survived the battlefield spoke of him in frightened whispers. They claimed the Hessian's rage had soaked into the ground like poison, that his spirit clawed its way back to the world not to haunt it, but to finish what life had denied him. Sleepy Hollow was never a place born of sunlight. It was carved instead from shadows, marshes that swallowed footsteps whole, ancient forests that whispered in languages forgotten by men, and graveyards so old that even the dead inside them might have forgotten their names. Every twisting path, every bridge leaning over a serpent-black stream seemed to wait for something or someone. The settlers who first built their homes here felt it immediately. They said the hollow breathed. They said it watched. As years folded into years, the people grew accustomed to this strangeness. Isolation had sculpted their minds into shapes both tender and brittle. Fear became a neighbor, superstition, a trusted friend. And every night, when lanterns flickered beneath wooden rafters, a quiet dread crept in with the drifting fog. No one walked alone after sunset, not unless necessity forced them or madness called them forward. In this town, stories were not mere entertainment. They were a survival instinct. Old wives gathered on porches, speaking in hushed, trembling tones of spirits that wandered the dark woods. Hunters swore they had heard galloping hooves pacing behind them on deserted trails, though not a single leaf stirred. And elders, those fragile pillars of trembling certainty, warned that Sleepy Hollow was a corridor between the living and the unliving, a place where the dead could return if their rage outweighed their rest. The earliest tale of the Headless Phantom was whispered near the old Dutch church bridge. Travelers claimed that, in the fog, they saw a figure emerging from the mist, tall, armored, and terribly silent. A horse darker than the night beneath it, and the rider, ah yes, the rider, clutching no head upon his shoulders, but searching. Some said he wandered only at night. Others insisted he followed only those whose hearts stuttered with fear. But all agreed on one rule. The horseman could not cross the church bridge, for consecrated ground repelled him as flame repels shadow. Those who survived claimed the phantom would vanish, dissolve into fog, into moonlight, into memory, just as the church bell mourned the midnight hour. Rumor fed rumor, and the tale grew fat and restless. A boy swore he heard the horseman breathing outside his window. A farmer's wife insisted she saw a glowing pumpkin rolling across her yard with no hands guiding it. A fisherman claimed the river whispered the name of the dead soldier each time he cast his net. And the tavern, oh the tavern, became the pulsing heart of these stories, where ale loosened tongues and imagination welded itself to fear. By listening to these legends long enough, the townsfolk began to expect the impossible. They felt eyes upon them in every shadow. They quickened their steps at every rustling leaf. And slowly, inevitably, by listening to these legends long enough, the townsfolk began to expect the impossible. They felt eyes upon them in every shadow. They quickened their steps at every rustling leaf. And slowly, inevitably, the fear made the legend real. Because a tale repeated enough times becomes a truth carved into the hollows of the mind. Sleepy Hollow needed the horseman, needed the dread, needed the unspoken law that after nightfall, the world belonged not to the living, but to something older, colder, and infinitely patient. And so the place became a perfect nesting ground for haunting, a cradle for the restless spirit of the fallen soldier, an echo chamber for the footfall of phantom hooves. Thus, the legend grew, not from facts, but from fear. Fear is fertile soil, after all, and Sleepy Hollow, it offered a harvest like no other. In the brittle hush of that October evening, when the mist slithered like restless spirits between the gnarled oaks, Ichabod Crane rode through the hollow with every nerve alight, every sense stretched taut like the string of a haunted violin. He was a man not wholly of this world, yet tethered by curiosity, superstition, and an insatiable hunger for the whispers of the unseen. The town had spoken in trembling tones of a rider, headless, eyes afire with an unholy glow, seeking the restitution of his lost crown, the very crown of mortality itself. And Ichabod, foolish in courage perhaps, or doomed by an unacknowledged fascination, had listened, hungering for tales that shivered the spine and made the heart quake. Dear listener, did you hear the rustle behind your shoulder just now? The sound of hooves on sodden earth, of leather creaking and spirit sighing. You must lean closer, subscribe to the story, remain in its shadow, or risk becoming like the townsfolk who spoke little after dark and trembled in the hush of midnight. For I shall carry you now across the bridge where superstition and fear entwine into the marrow of Ichabod's fate. The night grew thick around him, the fog a viscous cloak. The chase commenced with a silence that rang louder than any drum, a hush broken only by the pounding of hooves that might have been his own heartbeat, mirrored in the terror of the hollow. Ichabod's eyes strained to pierce the fog, to discern where man ended and nightmare began. Yet the figure advanced, as relentless as fate, as merciless as death itself. And in that pursuit, the very air seemed to whisper the truths that townsfolk had dared not speak. that fear can twist reality, that stories do not die, and that a man who dances with superstition may find himself ensnared in its eternal embrace. The pumpkin. Ah, the cruel jest of mortality disguised as jest. For in a moment that stretched to eternity, the thing that was his terror collided with his world, and the hollow echoed with a sound that was neither laugh nor scream, but a fusion of every dread he had ever held. Was it a missile, or merely the tossing of his imagination by unseen hands? Was Brom Bones ever the trickster hiding behind the guise of legend? Or was it the true horseman, the Hessian's wrath made flesh, his longing for restitution manifest in the autumn night? We shall never know. For the story, like smoke, refuses to settle, curling endlessly through shadow and memory. Yet Ichabod Crane became immortal that night, not in flesh, but in fear, in rumor, in the shadowed corridors of every mind that whispered of the Headless Horseman. He became a vessel, a lens through which the hollow, the myth, and the terror are eternally refracted. And so, listener, do not scoff at tales told by the fireside, for some shadows are long and some chases never end. Lean closer still, and you may feel the cold breath of history on your neck, the ghostly nudge of destiny, and the relentless hoofbeats of the rider still searching, still hunting, still waiting. And so the night swallowed Ichabod Crane, yet not entirely, for though his form vanished into whispers and shadows, his fear remained, a living pulse in the hollow, a thread linking the past to the present. But listen closely, dear wanderer of tales, and you shall hear more than the pounding of hooves. You shall hear the secret beating heart of the legend itself. For the Headless Horseman is no mere specter of the night, no jest of moonlit mischief. He is a symbol, a dark echo of what is lost, of what cannot rest, and of what relentlessly pursues the soul across the silent avenues of memory and dream. Consider the horse, great beast of shadow, its muscles coiled like springs of fate, its breath a vaporous fog upon the cold air. It carries more than rider. It carries inevitability, the inexorable approach of consequence, the unbending law that the past, no matter how buried, will rise to confront the living. And the rider himself, headless, a form denied identity, denied closure, embodies the terror that humanity often skirts, the loss of self, the dislocation of spirit, the unfinished business of life and death. He rides not merely to haunt, but to remind, to chase, to demand the reckoning that every mortal fears yet cannot escape. Ah, and the chase, listen to its rhythm, the cadence of dread. Thump, 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 the heartbeat of history dragging itself across the hollow. It is the confrontation with one's own mortality, the pursuit of the truths we dare not face. Ichabod, perched upon his trembling saddle, felt it as a lesson writ in shadow. That fear, once embraced, can sharpen the senses, twist perception, and render the ordinary extraordinary. Each turn of the path, each flicker of fog through the skeletal branches, was a message encoded by centuries of superstition, whispered from the mouths of elders, carried on the wind by those long dead. And yet, what of the missing head? That hollow vacant space atop the Hessian shoulders is no mere horror. It is a mirror to the incompleteness within us all. It is the reminder that some debts cannot be repaid, some wrongs never fully mended, and some secrets gnaw at the edges of our lives until we acknowledge them or are consumed. The horseman's relentless quest for restitution, for the simple return of what was taken, transforms him into more than legend. He becomes an archetype, a caution, and a fascination, eternal as the moonlight gleaming on the mist-soaked roads. And here, in this very hollow, in this trembling shadow of the past, we find the reason why the story survives, why every whisper of wind through the branches, every flicker of lantern light, every rustle behind the door carries the echo of the Headless Horseman. He is the embodiment of collective fear, the desire to name the unnameable, to chase the uncatchable, to confront the intangible darkness that lives in human hearts. To see him is to see the reflection of our own anxieties, our unfinished stories, our yearning to understand what lies beyond the grave. So, dear listener, should you wander the roads of Sleepy Hollow under an autumn moon, know this: the story is not merely a tale for children's ears, nor a ghost to be laughed at by the bold. It is a living, breathing specter of meaning. Every shadow is his hand, every gust of wind his whisper, every fallen leaf a reminder that the past rides with us, relentless, patient, inevitable. And in that knowledge lies the true horror, the intimate, inescapable understanding. If you have followed the shadows this far, you may think the tale of the Headless Horseman ended with Ichabod Crane, or even with the fog of Sleepy Hollow itself. But no, the horseman rides still. Each October, when the nights grow long and the wind carries whispers of dead leaves, he emerges anew, not merely in the hollow, but in every corner of imagination, in every festivity that dares to call upon fear. Halloween is his night, a temporal bridge between worlds, where costumes, masks, and stories converge to honor, or perhaps reenact, the chase. Children laugh, adults shiver, and somewhere, in the veil between reality and myth, the Hessian mounts once more, galloping through minds eager to relive his terror. Yet his influence stretches far beyond autumnal revelry. In the pantheon of modern horror, the horseman is an archetype, a template for the silent, relentless, unstoppable pursuer. His headless visage, his spectral determination, his impossible return from death. These elements ripple through literature, film, and television. From slasher villains to phantom riders, his shadow lingers, informing the way we conceptualize fear itself. Not sudden, not fleeting, but eternal and inevitable, stalking the corridors of the psyche as surely as he stalks the midnight roads. Sleepy Hollow itself has transformed under the weight of legend. The town, once a quiet Dutch settlement, now welcomes thousands of visitors each year, drawn by curiosity, by thrill, and by the desire to glimpse the spectral highways of lore. Tourists wander the bridges, peer into the forests, and attend the festivals where history and fantasy entwine. The Headless Horseman has become a symbol, not only of Halloween, but of an American Gothic identity, rooted in superstition, shadow, and the eternal tension between civilization and the wild, untamed mysteries that lie just beyond the lamplight. Scholars, too, have taken note, dissecting the myth with careful pens and analytical minds. They see in him echoes of war and violence, of migration and cultural fusion. They explore how European specters became American legends, how stories of restless spirits shaped perceptions of morality, fear, and community. In literary analyses, he is both character and concept, at once a cautionary tale, a ghostly presence, and an enduring symbol of the unknown. Every academic inquiry reinforces the truth. The horseman is more than folklore. He is an idea, a psychological echo, a vessel for collective memory. And yet, even beyond American borders, he rides. Conversations of global folklore recognize the Headless Horseman as a persistent figure, a universal archetype of vengeance, loss, and the uncanny. In distant lands, scholars and storytellers draw parallels to other spectral riders, other restless souls, other cautionary myths that warn, haunt, and thrill. He reminds us that fear is both local and universal, that the shadow of a story can stretch across oceans, and that legends, once born, refuse to die quietly. So, dear listener, the Headless Horseman endures, not merely as a ghost of Sleepy Hollow, but as a phantom of culture, imagination, and history. His hoofbeats echo in literature, in festivals, in the quiet corners of our minds, and in the very fabric of Gothic storytelling. And as the winds of October stir the leaves outside your window, remember, these stories are alive, waiting to gallop again. And if you wish to remain in the company of such dark wonders, subscribe, lean into the shadows, and let the chase continue.